Well, my getting into the Navy was basically a stumble. I kind of stumbled through just about everything that happened for me. All good. But when I was in high school, I was more interested in continuing playing water polo. And so any college I signed up for had to have a good water polo team. But to find a way in which to pay for that, because I don't think I was a scholarship material, I wound up getting a full ride Navy ROTC scholarship. Thought I was going to go to USC, and they said they're filled up. But if we see you've already applied to UCSB, we'll just move it over to UCLA where we have room when you want to go there. I go, okay. And that's how I became a Bruin. Went through the 4 years there. It was a fateful flight and my junior year midshipman cruise in an A4 that I said, this flying stuff's pretty neat. And so when got to do the selection at the end of the year at UCLA, I was able to take the test, qualify, and get into the flight program. Eyes have never been good, so I was always relegated to the Navy flight officer route. Went to Pensacola. I started the what they call banana school there, basic naval aviation navigation school. And there was this great guy, super persona, marble, the big mustache, gorgeous wife, living on the beach, and he was an F-4 guy. At the same time, there in Pensacola, the Blue Angels were flying F-4s, and their hangar was right across from where our training place was, and just fell in love with that airplane. So I was able to have grades were good enough to qualify for the fighter side. Went to the Rio school there at NAS Glencoe, there in Georgia, now shut down. I think it's a commercial center. Went through the school there, almost didn't make it. I did real well in Pensacola, worked really, really hard. And when I got to Glencoe, worked really hard, and then coasted. 2 downs in a row, holy cow. Did the green table thing with the Marine. I'll never forget him, Major Sweeney. And then got back on course. But I fell quite a bit, and I was the 9 out of 11, having fallen from like 2 or 3, and there were only 9 slots. The rest were staff. And I wanted to go to San Diego RAG really bad. So fortunately, Ron Teschner in front of me, who was the next pick, took the East Coast slot. So I got that last West Coast slot. Took he and his wife out to dinner a couple of times to thank him. They wound up going to San Diego for my F4 training. And that was in 73. And went through there, got accelerated a class, and then wound up hopping out of there and picking up my first squadron, meeting them in the Philippines. VF-114 Aardvarks flying F-4Js on the Kitty Hawk. So I met Kitty Hawk about a quarter of the way into their cruise and did that. The bulk of the ops there was really South China Sea and Sea of Japan. Again, it's 73, 74 time frame. Things are still not totally cooled down there in Vietnam, so we're still keeping a presence there at that time. And then came home, made another cruise on the Kitty Hawk, flying the F-4. And then I was due to rotate, and I wanted to fly the F-14, which had just been in a fleet introduced in the middle of the time I was cruising, and I wanted to get into that plane. But it wasn't meant to be. I did everything I could from getting NATOPS qualified, all the training, less the simulators. But the Bureau basically said, not right now, we're going to send you to the East Coast. You'll be an instructor, but in F4s and there. However, we got a deal if you're interested. I want you to an extended tour, go on a third cruise, which is not normally what you do in your sea tour. With a squadron, we're transitioning from the F-8 Crusader to F-4s and then make a cruise on the Coral Sea. I'm going to get F-14s after that? Sure. And so I took the orders, one of the best cruises I had. I was the first backseater of that squadron, VF-191, I'd had ever. I mean, it's a squadron that's been around since pre-World War II. And so I'm sitting in the squadron here with the funny wings and all these F-8 guys who some are going to transition to F-4s, and a lot of it was just transitioning F-4 experienced guys into the squadron. But it was a blast, just a whole fighter mentality, phenomenal cruise, Coral Sea being just about the oldest. I mean, Midway, I think, was the oldest cruiser at the time, but everything worked. A lot of pride with the ship's company. And again, it was East and South China Sea, Sea of Japan, was the primary operating we did on that. Again, it was around the 76, 77 time frame. Still keep an eye on China, what's going on there. So the Bureau did come through, and I got orders to the F-14 training squadron as an instructor. So I had to learn the airplane and then turn around at the same time to teach guys how to fly it. And it was like coming out of a cave. I mean, flying the F-4, first you always love your first plane. I mean, it's like your first car. I love the Phantom. But the F-14 was just incredible. Just one, you could see everything. I mean, you could look it back almost through the tails. The airplane was designed with a backseater in mind because of the nature of the missions that they were looking at, which I'll get into a little later. And what a dream. So went through that. Interesting, one of the first things they qualify you for to take the students out was care qual. I didn't know the airplane that much, didn't have that many hours, and here you are in one of the most dangerous scenarios, and I'm taking these nuggets out to teach them how to operate around a carrier. But the F-14 is a good airplane, and did well on that. Got tactics qualled quicker than most F-4 trained guys. That was great. But then the admiral on the base had fired his aide, and I was told to go interview. And I said, XO, I just got tactics called. I'm flying twice a day. I don't want to be an aide. And you can imagine what he told me after that. I said, yes, sir, but I'm going to tank the interview. Long story short, Admiral Gilchrist and I were great. I was his aide. I have a picture for you here of when I was flying with him. It was a flying deal. And he said, hey, you can certainly stay in as an instructor, which turned out to be true. To stay current and do your aide job, it's got to be one or the other. And that was pretty tremendous. So did that, learned a lot, opened my eyes that, the attitude before was if you ain't a fighter guy, you ain't shit. Found out that's not totally true, big picture-wise, and that was pretty neat. And then I got to go back to squadron. I wound up going back to 114 again. What I didn't mention earlier is a squadron on Coral Sea was the VF-191 Satan's Kittens, which is pretty famous also from the World War II Korea time frame. And back to 114, but now flying F-14s. So met them on the America in Singapore and cruised with them. But that time, the modlock we were doing was mainly in the Indian Ocean. Things were heating up between Iraq and Iran. We were not big fans of the potential of the Ayatollah Khomeini. So we were watching what was going on and making sure the Straits of Hormuz was still, because oil tankers were being attacked at the time. When I was there was after the Mayaguez incident, so missed out on that activity. But we spent a lot of time up there just off the Gulf of Oman, keeping an eye on what's going on up there. But then we had the opportunity to go in Australia, Hong Kong, as well as the China Sea and the Sea of Japan. So America cruised, and that was pretty neat because it was an East Coast squadron with a West Coast air wing on it. And so going home was actually not heading west. It was heading west, vice heading east. So we made our way back way of the Suez Canal with a Palma de Mallorca stop, and then eventually into Norfolk, with us flying all the way cross country back to San Diego to get home. And then my last cruise was on the Enterprise. There now as a department head. And what was interesting about the Enterprise, one, it was my first nuke, so I don't have to worry about standing alerts and smelling stack gas when we're in the back of the boat. But President Reagan had something up his sleeve. And it turned out as we went on cruise, we wandered our way very, very covertly up toward the Bering Sea. And the intent was that we were going to rendezvous with two other carriers off of Petro. And the intent was to just do a little thumping of the chest when Brezhnev was there. And so we're going up, and we don't hit Hawaii like you normally do, and we started heading up toward the Bering Sea, and we're doing the appropriate routes to be hidden from various surveillance devices that are out there, or up there. And concurrently, the Midway was working its way up north to the same rendezvous point, but everything operating, the radars and everything, in the Coral Sea headed up that way covertly. And so when a bear was coming out to go check out the Midway, it got intercepted by an F-14, which shocked the hell out of them. And I can say now later, but we were able to witness some of the conversation. And when the bear guy had to convince the guy on the ground, no, I'm telling you, dumb kid, it's an F-14, and oh, by the way, it's from the Enterprise. Enterprise? Where is the Enterprise? We thought it was, somewhere down by Hawaii. And then they discovered the Midway. Wait a minute, now they've got 3 cruises when they determined Coral Sea was up there. And we were doing 3 carrier ops right off the Bering Sea, just at the opening before it hits the Pacific, which makes for interesting weather, by the way. There's a lot of sea fog that would happen. And there was a story there where we actually had to have an F-14, 2 F-14s and an A-6 land on the Midway, which had never happened before. They were mainly an F-4 deck because they're the only one that was able to get into an open area. You could see the carrier antennas, but you couldn't see the deck because of the nature of the fog. But because of the 3 carriers operating up there, the Russians started throwing the Air Force at us. And we started getting overflights hourly practically. And it started out with just the standard surveillance guys. And then on day 2, they were showing up with weapons on their wings. So things are getting pretty dicey as we're slowly making our way down the coast past Petro, past Sakhalin Island, towards Vlad. Now you're in the Sea of Japan and just making your way down. Korea was spun up. They had some MiGs that would come out and check us out. So that was a highlight of the cruise. Some pretty interesting flying, probably the most engagement with the other guys than any other cruise that I've been on. And there was all kinds of stuff, bears, badgers, bisons, the maize coming out, and then later on backfires, which was the newest. It's kind of like a B-1 clone. They were coming out, their supersonic bomber. But they didn't have anything to do with the F-14 when we got close to them. So on one time, the skipper pulled myself and another guy in to work up some tactics with the flag on board to figure out how we could get in close enough to maybe get a picture or something, because they would not get anywhere close to 25 miles of us anytime we were radiating on them and want to get near it. So we did what we called Operation Fly Trap. What was neat about the F-14 is we have these data links, so you could basically, from the E2 or whatever, see a picture of what's going on without radiating. So we set a couple of sections out to go with a pretty high aspect on it. And the intent was the guy who was radiating would drive the backfire would turn away, obviously. But the intent was that he would hopefully turn at a time into the other guys, get the signal, hey, it's happening, and then we would light up and hopefully be able to get some intel on them. And that worked out okay, but those guys, they moved fast, got away fast. So that was pretty interesting part of the Enterprise cruise. So made our way there, Perth, Hong Kong, Subic, Yokosuka, and then headed home by way of Hawaii. And then, interestingly, I had some duties to finish up, so I didn't do the fly-off, and rode the ship in, and she was based out of San Francisco. And here we are pulling in. You can imagine what the homecoming's like. I mean, San Francisco area just loved the Enterprise. And as we're pulling into the Alameda, we ran aground. And it turned out, like 500 feet from the pier, stopped. And it basically, the tides there move a lot. And there were some shifting sands underneath that the pilot, the Enterprise, somehow didn't take account for. So here we are. And we had to wait about 4 hours before the tide came back in. And then we finally motored in to see all the folks that were there waiting for us. One thing out of that, San Francisco had a new drink for a while called Enterprise on the Rocks. So that was kind of fun. So that was the flying time. And then, as luck would have it, I got to go to another flying duty. I got selected to go to VX4, which is the operational test squadron out of Point Mugu, still in California now. So now, after 11 years at Miramar, boom, I'm back up flying north of LA, and some phenomenal flying. We were the test squadron for all fighter-related software, weapon systems, avionics, as well as weapon systems.
That's incredible. And so, in summary, the highlight numbers are, so you entered in what year?
Started flying in 73.
And then you retired. Were you a 20-year guy?
I was a 24-year guy. I flew 17 years straight. Then the payback was orders to the Pentagon. It was actually my former skipper at VX4, who was also a former Blue skipper. I said, boy, do I have a deal for you. And at that time, I had orders. I was in San Diego as the material readiness guy for F-14s on the staff there at Air Pac and flying. And he said, "No, you need to come to the Pentagon," which was, my heroes were the guys that did full careers and stayed flying. But it was something, and I basically went back there and I helped him stand up a special office for advanced requirements, which turned out later to be what defined my career, not just in the remainder of the Navy, but also my industry career.
And so I'd like to scoot back to, I don't know anyone else who's been in an F-14 during the Cold War, going nose to nose, even at 25 miles with the bear, with the Russians. And so if you would, and bring as much back as you can recall on this, what was it like putting your hands up there, launching off the deck, knowing that you were going to go as close as you could to the Russians, which were at the time were our main threat? What was the conversation between the front and the back seat? What was the conversation with your peers at that time about?
Well, normally the intercepts are done off alerts. So generally you'll have a 5, 10, 30-minute alert set up at the vulnerability times, where we know they normally would do their tracks and have the ability to get out and see and touch you. So at alert 5, you're literally sitting on the cat, strapped in, power on, and the whole point being, if need be, ready, set, go. And as you go off the cat, you're given a vector and you go get them. And then sometimes, depending upon how many, they'll launch a second alert. Could be your sister squadron, could be another of yours. And then the alert 15 were guys that were sitting in the ready room with the gear on, making their way up and get ready to follow in suit. Generally, there was a barrier that they wanted to make sure that they were intercepted beyond this particular point. You can imagine it was beyond a couple 100 miles. And so we're on our way out. And just to digress, the F-14, when it was designed at that time, maritime air defense was one of the key roles for the fighters. It's always been there. We used to be called bar cap with the F-4s, but now we had the bar cap, but you had this marine maritime where the F-14 was designed to be able to go out very, very far and to hopefully with the radar be able to detect early enough, determine the nature of the threat, and then let the ship know as soon as possible to where and when to send the cavalry. So there was this operation called the outer air battle. And the outer air battle was essentially we would set up a zone defense. And the zone defense had various routes, generally 4 of them, where the F-14s would go out and then they would cap close to 400 miles away from the ship, which leaves an interesting story because here you are over water that if you had to get into it, you only had about 40 minutes left to live. But that was our role, was to go out there. And then when it's time and you get ready, they'd have another one coming out to relieve you so you can go in and refuel. Tanker would come out in the middle station. A7s were out there about the halfway point because you're so far out that your UHF comms had to be relayed back to the ship. And the whole point was to say, here they're coming, they're on this particular sector, things would collapse, and then the Army, the rest of the flight deck would come out to take on with the intent of engaging those guys before they were able to do weapons release on their anti-ship weapons. So that's what we did. And you'd be out there 400 miles away. We were flying routinely for, that time, 4-hour flights, which was kind of new for us because normally you're doing cyclic ops, which is about 1 hour and 45 minutes to just under 2 hours. So it was a new thing. Of course, when the Desert Storm came on, it wasn't unusual for those guys to be flying 6-7 hours at a time. But that's what we were doing to deal. So yeah, we're on our way out. And you do your intercept, and those things are huge. And these are the same looking bombers that I was looking at 10, 12 years earlier in the F-4. So they got windows all over the thing, so they're taking all kinds of pictures of us. We be communicating with them as appropriate. They be showing, the Playboy pictures, and hey, we're one of you guys. We were watching what we were emitting and saying all that stuff because they're collecting all kinds of stuff. But we would get in there, and then the games would start as they were coming in because you can't really dissuade them from wanting to come over the ship. But your job was to try to interfere with the amount of photo taking as possible which they broke the code on pretty early, to where here you are trying to cop them, and they would just go down. It wasn't unusual for them to set themselves up where they would do a turn into the ship, and you'd had to get up or else they were trying to drag you in the water. So you had those kind of games going on. But we would stay. Oh, well, they would come down 100 feet, 150 feet.
And how fast are we going?
Oh, not, 300 knots. Yeah. 270, 300. But yeah, the games, but they're out there to try to check things, to spot the deck, see what's going on, got the E-lint and stuff. And then they would head back, and we would stay with them, probably get relieved and stay with them as they went back out beyond that particular point where it's okay for them to be on their own. And that happened, again, on the Enterprise a lot. It did happen on the Coral Sea cruise, on a Kitty Hawk cruise. We were too far south. I don't recall seeing anything from the Russian side, but we did have some Iranian, like anti-submarine warfare birds that were coming out when we were doing our mod locks in the IO during that cruise.
So when you're in the back seat, did you bring along a good camera also?
That was part of our job, to do intel. I couldn't find those. I was hoping to show you where you'd kind of get a sense of what kind of pictures, but to be honest with you, you do some Googling, you'll find them all over the place, as well as flight deck ops. But yes, but it wasn't just the planes. Part of our job is ship always wants to know what's around them, which includes ships, submarines. Submarines are the big, if you ever see one surface, which as you got later in the cruise, there was more ships that could stay underwater longer. But my earlier cruises, a lot of diesels out there, so we'd be catching them when they're snorkeling or just on the, and we'd taking pictures of them so they could, the intel guys could do. Of course, we had our own training to make sure we could recognize a Cresta, a Krivac, Cashin, whatever nature kind of DDs that the Soviets had, who were all over us, both in the IO as well as when we were up north on the Enterprise.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask you an unfair question now, which is just a big picture question of the Cold War was a major thing from the days of the Berlin airlift until the 90s or so, 89 or so, and a lot of effort, the Enterprise with all your work. What did the Navy accomplish and this is why it's unfair, is because it's a big picture question, but what did you accomplish with all of that time by meeting these Russians? What was the hope that you could accomplish out of all these different, engagements?
Well, one I think is...
This is just to help educate people who don't
Yeah. Well, the carriers obviously are out there to provide a presence, not only to tell the guys, hey, hold off, but let the smaller countries out there know, hey, we're there to have your back. To have these kind of tactics and this kind of weaponry available, I think also gave the Russians basically a show of strength. I think that's what we were accomplishing. But again, the presence, the constant, presence of the carriers out there was always these one out in these particular mod locks. So big picture wise, I think that was the major thing, is that they had a viable threat out there that they needed to respect. Not to say that we also respected them. And you'd have these little parries that would go on periodically, but just to make sure that the world knew that we're out there and we're looking after them.
And the other part that always fascinates me is that you mentioned you're doing a cap out over water that you have 30 or 40 minutes left to live if you were to have to go down in it because it's just so cold. If you would try to just paint one of those pictures for me visually, putting your face up against the window and just seeing those white caps out there, I'm sure there was kind of downtime sometimes. Will you tell me what it was like, what you were hearing, what you were smelling, what you were seeing out that window?
Well, we were wearing wetsuits, poopy suits, as they call them, but very tight around the neck here and here. That would give you some extra time. We had the standard ejection seat stuff with the raft and all that you I've heard from other folks. The Air Force was, as well as the Coast Guard, were set up there with C-130s to help support us if anything went down. There were some picket ships out there with their helos that could possibly be there. But the bottom line to your question is we didn't think about it. We didn't think about it. It was basically that happened, it wasn't our day. big thing was to make sure that we could somehow, if something bad ran, we could nurse that airplane back. There weren't any bingo fields, friendly bingo fields. I thinking of that P3 that had the jet that hit it and had to go into Hainan. That was not a good thing. We didn't want to have anything like that happen with us. So it was blue water ops, big time. So answer your questions, really to think about it, we were suited up as best we could for survival. And hopefully we could get the word out fast enough, get the guys on the move, give them good enough coordinates. We did have a decent INS in the F-14 to get help out there. Fortunately, it didn't happen. I told you about that one time with the trapping aboard the Midway. Again, an amazing story there because it was a former F-4 skipper, my former XO, who was on the tanker, who was in an open area and said, "Hey, Midway, come over here. You guys up there, you can't make it to the ship, come over to the Midway." Midway's going, "Can we do it?" "Yeah, we can do it." Then they had to fly some stuff out to the Midway to be able to launch them because they didn't have the right holdbacks to launch the bigger F-14s. But that was pretty scary there for a bit.
I can imagine. Yeah, not a good place to have a problem. And now the Midway's right in San Diego, right? So you can go see the Midway carrier.
Absolute. And my old squadrons are actually with their livery, the F4 that's on there, the V114 is there. The answer, yes.
Okay.
So,
Okay. I'll make sure I'm doing good on time, and I am good. So, stepping back to the fact that you were shaped by the U.S. Navy in the middle of the Cold War, at the height of the Cold War in many ways. What does it mean to have been a captain in the Navy? What was the best part about being a naval officer in some of the most incredible aircraft that they had to offer?
well, the best time was when I was a lieutenant commander. The captain part came in when I was doing staff duty back east. Interesting stuff, can't talk about it. It was just the flying. The VX4, whoa. The guys we were with, again, the nature of the flying, I told you about Coral Sea. We were doing some neat stuff, spin rendezvous. We had these things called yo-yos where they would launch you first off, and you'd go out, and you would either hit the F4s that were coming back, get ready to recover, or it was two, you'd go out, you split off, do everything, full afterburner, and your job was to come in on the back end of that recovery. So it was about a 20, 25-minute flight, just pulling G's, burning and turning, but it was basically air combat training, and we were able to get peaked up, and it was neat that the ship was willing to do that kind of stuff. So back to your question, you don't think about big picture-wise what you're doing as far as helping with the nation, but we were very proud of what we were doing, couldn't believe we were getting paid for it. Had great folks. Again, I was post-Vietnam era, so the guys my senior guys were all combat trained, combat experienced. So I was getting the benefit of that at the time. And then as I moved up, as you move up, then you get the newer guys as a backseater, and that was always a challenge, especially around the boat. Your biggest thing was to really let the reason they made it the boat is they had the wherewithal to do it, but sometimes they would lose the edge, whatever. And so you got to be a pretty good talker because you didn't have a stick in the back. All you had was the ejection seat and your lip mic, and help the guys get it back to where they could fly the ball right. So there were some interesting, colorful things on that. But really, we were just proud of what we were doing. We were proud of who we were doing it with and for.
Yeah, my dad was a Navy. I'm a big fan of our big, powerful Navy because it's just a carrier with aircraft all on deck. Just pretty, like you said, it sends a statement that America is here to be reckoned with.
Yeah, especially with the port visits. 5,000 people descending upon the beach, and a little bump in the economy there, and also help for really the relations with the country.
Okay, and now the theme of what I've been asking everybody is you've obviously had to work extremely hard to get through these different programs and difficult programs and also difficult times. I'm sure there was times when it was a lot more difficult to show up to work than others. What is it inside of you and in terms of advice to people who, let's say they're going through pilot training now, or let's say they're going through something tough right now, which the nation is doing in many ways. What advice do you have? What drove you through difficult times when times were just not good?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, when I started out in Pensacola, I was just an average student out of college. My problem was I discovered beer in fraternities. I was able to get through okay, but really knuckled down and found that to do well, the nature of what I had to do to study to make it work. And then I fell off that a little bit and almost didn't get my wings and almost didn't get that. And I held that work ethic through. I never lost that lesson through the rest. So for the young guy starting is you really got to focus on what you're there for. The problem is some of the guys are not a problem, but some of the folks that are married, got kids, and compartmentation is a big deal, a skill that you learn, and it's something you need to learn so that you can really succeed and excelling in learning the flying. And I was fortunate. I had great instructors. I got to go through Top Gun. That was some of the best flying, by the way. So you get those kind of training, take full advantage of the training given to you, and just focus on being the best that you can be.
And when times get tough, where do you draw from? Is it you think of your family? Do you think, are you a person of faith? You know, what kind of things put you through a tough time?
Well, self-confidence was key. I had great parents who I think showed me a good work ethic. I had a father that basically said, if you want to do this, you need to do that. Well, you're not doing that, therefore you can't do this. Okay, now you're doing that. Now you can do this. And again, that lesson was not learned, including the raising of my kids, who are wonderful. They're doing great. I don't know if I really fully answered your question.
That really is, I'm always interested in what has shaped people. And you're mentioning, their father telling you a lot of that is an important part of that. And then, my closing question is, if, let's say we're standing in front of a big, beautiful F-14 or an F-4, you can take your pick, but a bunch of kids come up and they're all pointing at that aircraft. I wonder what that was like to fly. If you were to answer this group of children, what was that airplane like to fly? How would you describe it to them?
Well, as I shared, the F-4 was phenomenal because it was my first. It was the fastest. It was an awesome plane, but the F-14 was the best, and especially when they re-engined it. And it was such a kick. That airplane, Mach 2, pull all kinds of Gs. The weaponry for air-to-air as well as air-to-ground was incredible. The weapon system was the best in the world. You could see guys hundreds of miles away launch independently, six of them, all at once, individually, and knocking them out. It was the pinnacle. And the people you're flying with, again, flying off an aircraft carrier going from 0 to 160 in 2 seconds, it's hard to describe a cat shot. And the trap, roughly the same in reverse. Nighttime, not fun, but in itself, because you had to do enough of it, you got comfortable with it, reasonably comfortable doing that. So all I can say is, all that you think that it is, and then some. It's just phenomenal. Get down low. If you're up high and you're flying Mach, you're lucky to have clouds and you have a sense of how fast you're going. If not, all you saw was the instruments do their thing. But then you get down to where you have some sort of reference, and that's awesome. Speed is good.
Well, that's a great answer. That would make anyone want to fly. And in closing thoughts is there one memory, thought, radio call, person that sometimes when you're just relaxing on the porch that comes back to you from your time in the Navy?
I was blessed with some phenomenal leaders. Well, I shared with you that tour with the Admiral, and he said, call me Paul. No, sir, I'll never be able to call you Paul. He took me under his wing, and really I learned an awful lot from him. Amazing guy. I mean, if you just take a moment just to describe him, that gives you the sense of where you get the lift, because you are, as I shared with you earlier, I'm so proud to be even just at the table with these Friday pilots. Paul Gilchrist, the guy's name, call sign Gator. A lieutenant. He was an F-8 pilot. He's going through TPS out of Pax River, and he's doing his standard curriculum test, and he's doing full aileron rolls on a T2, and it keeps going. He has to bail out. He bails out. It's a streamer chute. Oh, shoot. Boom. He hits the ground. It turns out it's a freshly plowed field in Maryland. They get to him. He's dead. No, well, he'll never walk again. Disprove that. He'll never fly again. Disprove that. Had a squadron, had an air wing, came back to a wing commander. 6'4", creaks when he walks, played a hell of a game of racquetball. And we flew the F-4, the F-4, F-5, and the F-14 together on cross countries. And then the things he shared with me when he took me some of his trips to Washington, you had that. The skipper that was the former POW, I had two of them, matter of fact. One with 191, Danny Moore, great guy. And another one, Rod Knutson, who was, they call the Tough Nugget, one of the department heads. Great guys. And then later on, Jack Inch, my skipper with 114, who also said, even though I was a lieutenant commander at the time, generally two seniors, said, hey, well, I remember we're walking the deck on the America headed home. And he said, Frank, we're looking at the turnaround training. We're just wondering for you, you want to go to safety school at Monterey or Top Gun? Whoa! Obviously the answer was Top Gun. But Jack, he made some things happen, both for that and then later on going to VX4, which was, again, phenomenal squadron and an elite group.
Yeah, so having like good mentors, a friend
Mentors, just blessed with phenomenal leaders.
It's incredible. Well, thank you. Any closing shots? Otherwise, I'm going to look at this picture real quick. If you would take that part out. Will you just tell me what's in these photos here? You can just talk right through the camera.
Well, this one here, actually, DM is part of it. When I was at San Diego on the staff there, they needed a F-4 quad crew to go pick up an F-4 from Davis-Monthan to fly to San Diego. Eventually was going to go to the Aerospace Museum. The nature of this particular one, if you can see the stars, this was the plane that Randy Cunningham and Willie Driscoll had shot down their two MiGs in Vietnam. And they kept the stars on that airplane ever since. And this airplane was coming to us after having done a tour with the Marines. And so it's a Marine guy there. He, myself, we literally meet here. We brief in the Gedunk there and go out, grab the plane. It was a flush and fill, and literally flew it to San Diego. And now if you go to San Diego, you'll see the F-4 right behind a MiG-17 or 15 at the Atrium San Diego Aerospace. This is a VX-4. This is one of the debts that we took. One of the neat things about the F-14 was in the F-4 we didn't have a gun. And so now we have it in the F-14 and we were training air-to-air gunnery. And this is a picture taken of the groups on a debt. You see the banner behind them with one of the F-14s just celebrating what we had was a very successful debt. I'll save this for last. This is me on an operational shoot in VF-114. That's the Phoenix missile. And we were going actually against an F-86 off the coast of California. Talked about the admiral I was with. This is when we were on a trip to Grumman to talk to them about some things that they were looking at to help improve the F-14. That's obviously me in the back seat with Gilchrist in the front. This is me during the debrief, talking about some things I'd like to see with the F-14. And as you can see, no, I'm not Italian. That's just typical fighter guy using his hands.
That's right.
One of the fun things at VX-4, VX-4 was famous for this black F-4 called Vandy 1. But the skipper at the squadron at that time was big on the F-14. So we had an F-14 painted black. That's me in the backseat of the F-14 as Grumman and some others were taking a film of the two planes flying around Southern California.
Yeah, I think I've seen models of that.
Yeah, it was a one-time paint job. Yeah. And then the other thing I wanted to show you, as I was going through some maybe that'll explain something to you.
The average Navy pilot, despite the sometimes swaggering exterior, is very much capable of such feelings as love, affection, intimacy, and caring. These feelings just don't involve anyone else.
Thanks, guys. Thank you for the time.
Yeah.